Hi, everybody. This is SAAD for the SAAD Truth. This past August, an article came out in Quillette magazine titled "The Google Memo: Four Scientists Respond." So many of you, of course, remember the story with James Damore, who was a guest on my show. In case you missed it, you might want to check it out. And these four scientists came along and offered their insights regarding the debacle in question. And then my good friend Ali Rizvi, whom I respect, and he's a lovely guy and someone who's been on my show, and he does wonderful work in critiquing Islam, the religion that he was born into, wrote a tweet wherein he said the following: "Interesting but misleading headline. Only one of these four is a real scientist, and it's the woman," with a smile. And then someone wrote, "Wow, Ali, so Gad Saad isn't a scientist then?" Now, of course, this wasn't targeting me because I wasn't one of the four scientists who responded to the who responded in the article in question. But I decided to take Ali to task. Now, he responded, not disputing any of that or that their contributions aren't important, just saying they're not, quote, scientists as the headline claims. And so then I responded to Ali, "You might want to watch my most recent chat with Ruben Report. Now that you've demoted us to, quote, non-scientists, I'll need to update my CV." And then Ali doubles down, "Not a demotion, separation of fields. Example, writers and journalists aren't, quote, inferior to scientists. They're just not scientists." And then to prove his point, he posts a snippet from Feynman on social science, as though, by posting something that Richard Feynman said, derogating social sciences, then the argument is closed. Gee, I wonder if there is a logical fallacy associated with that. In any case, then Ali doubled down and said that, well, the reason why what the three, quote, fake scientists, the reason why they're not scientists is because, in the social sciences in general, you ready for this? You don't have testable hypotheses. Now, that's quite extraordinary because it would seem to me that during my doctoral training at Cornell and then subsequently in my 23 years as a professor, all I've been doing is testing hypotheses. And certainly the three non-scientists that he mentions as non-scientists also seem to have been doing only that, but apparently they're not. So I wrote, "Dear Jeffrey Miller and David Schmidt, I regret to inform you that Ali Rizvi has declared you as non-scientists. You might have thought that you were doing science, but you are not. Dr. Rizvi has explained to us that we don't tackle testable hypotheses. You might be bright, but you are not scientists. All of my other colleagues reading this, unless you wear a lab coat and use an fMRI, I'm afraid that you've been faking it all along. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news." Now, let me just very quickly give you some metrics regarding the three fake scientists and the one real scientist, according to Ali. Now, again, the only reason I'm mentioning Ali is not to attack Ali specifically, but it's because a lot of people who otherwise you would think are educated succumb to just breathtaking fallacies. So the three, quote, non-scientists are Lee Jussim, who is a social psychologist. I believe I might have communicated once or twice with him in the past via email because I think he is a fellow Psychology Today columnist or blogger. And then the other two really fake non-scientists are David Schmidt, whom I know well, who is a former doctoral student of David Buss, one of the pioneers of evolutionary psychology, another fake scientist. And then Jeffrey Miller, who is a good friend of mine, who is an evolutionary psychologist, a leading evolutionary psychologist. And then the real scientist, according to Ali, is Deborah Soh, S-O-H, who is a person who recently finished her PhD, looking at, she studies, various issues dealing with sexuality from a neuroscientific perspective. So I think she used brain imaging. Boy, that sounds sciencey to me. So what I decided to do is go to Google Scholar citations Now, I'm familiar with their works, at least certainly the work of David Schmidt and Jeffrey Miller. Now, these are guys who've been cited in all of the most prestigious scientific journals that you could imagine, and they've published in some of the most prestigious scientific journals. But Ali has explained to us that they've been faking it all along. So Lee Jussim, here's his Google Scholar citations. This is the number of works that have cited his work, 9,719, with an H index of 43. Now that's a very, very impressive bibliometric score. So remember, 9,719 citations. David Schmidt, another fake scientist, his Google Scholar citations is at 12,938 with an H index of 37. And then the third faker, Jeffrey Miller, 12,290 with an H index of 52. Now let's look at the real scientists. And by the way, I don't know Deborah So, and I'm sure she's a lovely person, so this is not in any way denigrating her. But let's look at the real scientists according to Jeffrey Miller. Not Jeffrey Miller, to Ali Rizvi. According to Ali Rizvi, Deborah So, she has no Google Scholar page. So for a real scientist, she seems to not be, not have a fundamental metric that now all people who are in the sciences wish to have, which is to show what their Google metrics are. I did a quick manual count of her papers. I think she has 4 papers in total. Now, the other 3 folks in question have, hundreds and hundreds of scientific publications. And her H index is 3, with a total number of citations at 102. So any of the 3 fake scientists have undoubtedly countless singular papers that have more citations than her entire career. So why would Ali, who is otherwise a bright and educated and lovely fellow, why would he succumb to such a just breathtaking position? And I think this comes from, again, well, first it comes from lack of humility, where you think that you know more than you know. And so you decide to make pronouncements about things that you know nothing about. So, for example, to argue that social scientists don't engage in testable hypotheses might be the most extraordinary argument I might have heard in the past 10 years. And that is saying a lot, because I've heard a lot of baffling arguments in the past 10 years. So, for example, when I study the effects of the menstrual cycle on women's behaviors, does Ali think that I'm not actually testing specific hypotheses? Or when I study how men's testosterone levels rise or decrease as a function of engaging in conspicuous consumption or watching another man engage in conspicuous consumption, does he think that I'm not testing a specific hypothesis? Every single thing that myself or any of the other 3 fake scientists have done in our careers is to test hypotheses. What do you think we teach in our research methodology course? We engage in interpretive dance. But in any case, I think this comes from a form of quasi-religious buffoonery, whereby people use cues to determine what constitutes science in their brains. So, for example, if you wear a lab coat, then you're a scientist. If you don't wear a lab coat, then you're a fake scientist. So, for example, if you do fMRI studies, brain imaging, and you as the researcher wear a lab coat, then that lab coat means that you're a scientist. If you do the exact same study but you don't wear a lab coat, that means you're a fake scientist. If you have a Bunsen burner in the back, behind you, even if you don't use the Bunsen burner, that means you're a real scientist. If you don't have a Bunsen burner, that means you're a fake scientist. I actually tweeted a few. I call these tweets science cues for schmucks. So fMRI used by marine biologists on salmon, that's science. fMRI used on consumers by a neuromarketing professor, that's fake science. So what determines whether the brain imaging is science or not is whether you wear a lab coat and you study a salmon, in which case it's real. But if you don't wear a lab coat and you study consumers, well, that's marketing. So that's not science. And that's exactly why he thought that Deborah So would be a scientist, because when he read her bio, he said, oh, she studies sexual neuroscience using brain imaging. Gee, that just sounds sciencey. But David Schmidt, who has conducted studies looking at universal patterns of sexuality across 50 plus countries, well, that's just fake science. Then I wrote, Science Cues for Schmucks. If fancy mathematical model is used to understand climate, it's science. If fancier mathematical model is used to understand consumer choice, it's faux science, bruh. You need a white lab coat for it to be science. Modeling human behavior is interpretive dance. So all of those psychologists and economists and cognitive scientists who trained me during my doctoral studies at Cornell, and all of the past 20 plus years in science that I've pursued, apparently all fake science. I had even written a post on my Facebook page. Let me read it to you. And again, this sounds as though I'm attacking Ali. And again, my point is not to critique Ali, and I hope that he doesn't take it the wrong way. But ultimately, we all have to stand by the public words that we utter and the public positions that we take. This is a position that I often see both from educated people and less educated people, whereby they think that there is some sort of hierarchy whereby if you take an anatomy course, that's science. But if you study sociometrics, well, that's just BS. Now, again, remember that I'm someone who has railed against some of these fields, sociology and others. I even critique the field of marketing very forcefully, not because they're not sciences, but it's because in many cases they are institutionalized realities that causes these fields to be, if you like, polluted by things that are less than scientific. So, for example, in the case of sociology, once you have ideology and activism that supersedes the pursuit of science, that's when sociology becomes BS. But it's not that sociology epistemologically is non-scientific. There are mathematical modelers who study social systems that engage in extraordinarily rigorous work. So again, the people who try to argue that sociology is BS but chemistry is real, using idiotic cues like whether you wear a lab coat or not, don't understand what the scientific method means. So I wrote, I hope that Ali Rizvi can explain why the National Academy of Sciences, now this is the most prestigious scientific organization arguably in the world. So I hope that Ali Rizvi can explain why the National Academy of Sciences lists psychology and social/political as divisions within its ranks. Now this is the most prestigious grouping of scientists. And then of course, using my classic sarcasm, they are probably trying to make all, quote, fake scientists who study the fake phenomena involving humans feel good about themselves. My point is not to attack my good buddy Ali Rizvi. He's been a guest on my show and he strikes me as a lovely and decent human being. But you might imagine that having spent 2+ decades as a professor working with endless very serious scientists, all of whom Ali has decided that they were faking it all along, I might be left astonished by such grotesque lack of understanding of what science is and the associated hubris in taking such a position. Cheers. And then I provided the list of members of the National Academy of Sciences. And guess what? Apparently, social scientists are part of this grouping of the most prestigious organization of science in the world. So again, for example, if you look at marketing or consumer behavior, one of the big problems that you'll find is that there are very, very few replications of key effects. Now, that's a problem because you'd want in science that a phenomenon be replicated many times before it becomes part of core knowledge. So I'm the first to criticize many aspects of consumer behavior, much less so evolutionary psychology. because it actually does have a very strong epistemological foundation. So it's not as though I'm not willing to turn criticism inward towards fields that I work in, but to argue that people who are not in anatomy or physiology are, fake scientists is just breathtaking. It's unbecoming of someone who is as educated as my good friend Ali. Now, I should mention, physicians are not scientists. Ali is a forensic pathologist by training. By the way, I joked with him. I satirized. I said, bruh, you're a fake MD because, bruh, you deal with dead patients, right? That's the kind of, frankly, silliness that you get when you have someone make pronouncements about apparently something that he knows literally nothing about. So the social sciences are, in a sense, weaker than the natural sciences only because, in my view, they don't pursue consilience or unity of knowledge to the extent that they should. And this is something that I've been railing against in the social sciences. I even have a SAAD TRUTH clip. You could look at SAAD TRUTH 431, where I specifically criticize the social sciences. So it's not as though the social sciences are not deserving of criticism, because they certainly are. But just like there is shoddy work in the social sciences, there's endless shoddy work in the natural sciences. What differentiates the social and the natural sciences are the phenomena that are being studied. Now, arguably, if you're a human being, the most important entity that you could study are humans and our brains, the things that define our personhood. And of course, many very serious social scientists engage in exactly that, and they don't do it via interpretive dance and postmodernist art. They do it by testing hypotheses. So my good friend Ali can go to a library and open up journals within the social sciences and see whether we test hypotheses or whether we simply play songs by, I'm trying to think of some new age singer, and just do interpretive dance as a way of generating knowledge. So again, the point of this clip is to explain to people. By the way, I received tons of messages from people asking me, oh, is psychology a science, professor? Is this a science? Is that a science? And so the point of this clip, more generally, not to attack Ali, but to explain to people that what determines whether something is a science or not is whether those who are pursuing knowledge within that discipline are adhering to the scientific method. Do they propose a set of hypotheses that are empirically falsifiable? Do they develop data collection instruments that are appropriate for the task at hand? They collect the data. They then analyze the data using some statistical inferential tools, and then they arrive at conclusions. So a sociologist could be a scientist. A physicist could be a scientist. A historian could be a scientist or not, depending on the epistemology that he or she uses. Even a professor of literature could be doing science. So, for example, if you are a professor of literature who studies, say, Darwinian literary criticism, where you apply, say, content analysis to study the contents of literature to determine whether there are certain human universals that manifest themselves across literature genres, across time periods, well, to the extent that you are positing specific hypotheses using a specific accepted methodological tool, analyzing the data, well, then you're doing science. So again, it is baffling to me that someone who could spend as many years of education as some of the folks who decide to make pronouncements as to what is or isn't science could be making such buffoonish arguments. Science is a process. A historian could be a scientist, an archaeologist could be a scientist, a consumer psychologist could be a scientist, an evolutionary psychologist could be a scientist, and a physicist could be a scientist. So there you have it, folks. Again, my deep apologies if this comes across as though I'm specifically targeting Ali. I'm not. I'm only using the exchange that we had earlier this summer, if you like, as motivation for this more general point. And that is, I'm answering the question that I receive from many people when they ask me, is history a science, professor? Is sociology a science? Is archaeology a science? And the answer to that is, again, to repeat, apologies if I'm being repetitive, if you pursue the scientific method, then you are doing science. If you don't, then you're not doing science. Cheers, everybody. Have a good weekend. Ciao.